This is For Your Reference, a sports reference podcast.
Welcome back to For Your Reference, a sports reference podcast. This is where we get to share the interesting stories that have grabbed our attention while working on the Sports Reference family of websites. I'm Charlotte. I'm on the data team at Sports Reference, and today I'm joined by Jay Hutchinson, also on the data team.
Hello. Happy to be here.
Great. Thanks so much for joining us. Our topic today is yellow and red cards in the World Cup, and it's great that you're here because you actually have some experience handing out yellow and red cards.
Well, not in the World Cup, but at lower levels, sure. I've been refereeing since 2010. I've got, I think, 1,900 or so games under my belt, so I've seen a few things.
So this topic was one that I wanted to cover because some of my first memories at Sports Reference were summer 2018 when I kind of joined as an intern, and I was in our office in Philadelphia. And of course, we were all super excited about the World Cup, and we were just launching our FBref soccer site. And so we were watching World Cup games at lunch, and then, also maybe like in the second tab on our computer screen, our background window. And I wasn't sure if everyone else was watching. We had kind of a cubicle set up in the office, and I was like peeking around. Are other people as distracted as I am? And I have this clear memory of when we had like the first day of games and there was a goal scored in the middle of the day, and we hear from Sean Foreman's office behind the door, woohoo! Like, just cheers coming. Does this sound familiar to you?
Oh yeah, Sean is an exuberant fan, and it wasn't just during the World Cup, but midweek Manchester City Champions League matches, anytime a goal was scored, you could definitely hear it. My office is way on the other side of our space from his, and he was still very audible. He's a very exuberant fan.
Yeah, so once I heard that, I was like, okay, we're all watching, it's fine. We're all a little distracted. And one of the things that always caught our attention, what we're talking about most, obviously the goals were like, did you see that? That was amazing. But also the cards. And what's crazy is the cards can kind of take center stage and get maybe even more attention than the goals do. If I just think of things that stand out from World Cups, I'm like, did you see the guy that bit another guy? That's crazy. That's what I want to talk about. And I actually, when I first started putting together some notes for this episode, one of the first things I did was look up Luis Suarez, who is the Uruguayan player who did bite an opponent at the World Cup in 2014. He actually did not get a card for this.
Well, it's hard to see someone biting another person. Maybe it's easier these days with VAR, but yeah, back in... before we had the benefit of video review, you just had to count on the referee to, see one person biting another among a swarm of 20 people, and that's not always something that can be done. So, unfortunately, he got away with that. But I think he was suspended after the fact, though.
Yes, he was later punished, but not during the game. I took a little detour to newspapers.com just to search for Luis Suarez, set the year to 2014 World Cup, just see what I could find. And I noticed that there were 8 times as many search results when I had his name in there versus when I had Diego Godin, who is the lone goal scorer. The person who kind of determined the outcome of the game was overshadowed by this quite clearly.
Certainly that's not what we love. We don't love to see that in the beautiful game, but... for better or worse, sometimes other stories. I guess it's not just in soccer, but in any sport, misconduct by a participant can overshadow the competition itself, and we don't love to see that. But it's just the nature of the competitive game that we love.
Yeah, I found that again and again. Maybe we'll get back to Zidane and Materazzi in the 2006 World Cup, but they had an infamous red card situation, and they were actually the 2 goal scorers in the game, but their 2 red cards were what everyone was talking about afterwards. And even when I'm looking ahead for the 2022-23 World Cup that we're super excited is coming up, there was a qualifying game I was reading about between Costa Rica and Canada, and all the headlines I was seeing, and maybe this is because I was seeing Canadian news sources, but all the ones I was seeing were about Mark Anthony Kaye getting kicked out of the game, and we talked about like the other player involved in the altercation. We do mention that Costa Rica ends up winning 1-0, but who scored that goal for Costa Rica?
Who knows? Who cares?
Not even mentioned in the article.
Doesn't matter.
All we care about is that Mark Anthony Kaye was out of the game. So, yeah, we were, wondering about why there's, so many prominent cards in the World Cup. Is it maybe just the higher stakes, the money on the line?
Yeah, certainly when there is an incident with a player doing something outlandish and it happens in the World Cup, it's certainly going to make bigger headlines than if it were to happen in some small competition where we only have one camera angle or something. In the World Cup, we're going to have multiple camera angles with a billion eyes on these matches. So
one of the things that I noticed is that actually the number of cards have been decreasing recently. I don't think I would have guessed that because they always kind of get so much attention when they do happen. But ever since the number of cards peaked in 2006, we saw fewer cards in 10, fewer in 14, fewer in 18. Does that surprise you that that's the way the game is going?
Well, from my experience, there is greater attention being paid to player safety these days. And speaking from having sat through countless hours of referee instruction, over the last 12 years, in my experience, they're more specific about drawing the line at certain levels and saying anything at this line needs to be a yellow card, anything at this line needs to be a red card, and it's non-negotiable. Whereas in the past, there was a little bit more game management, you might say, where referees might talk themselves out of a worthy misconduct decision. I think in the past there was a lesser expectation with respect to penalizing hard challenges that may have endangered an opponent's safety. In the past, there are challenges that are clear red cards today that in the 1980s would have been a yellow card or maybe even no foul. As you look back at some of these highlights from Premier League 80s, 90s, and it's a completely different game. And 2006 might have been the peak of that, and when they decided to change their philosophy, move it in a different direction. I can only speak since 2010, and definitely in these last 12 years or so, there's a greater focus from referees on penalizing fouls that could harm others.
Sure. Yeah, 2006 was the peak of cards at the World Cup, but we have to account for the fact that there weren't red cards when the World Cup started. So the red cards were introduced in 1970, inspired by a referee, actually. He had trouble getting somebody to go off the field in the 1962 World Cup and sort of had this idea that we could introduce the cards to make things simpler. In the years before the red cards and yellow card system, certainly players were getting penalized, getting sent off the field. And I had in my notes about a 1954 game between Hungary and Brazil that was named the Battle of Bern.
Oh,
yeah. And that name kind of inspired people to start calling the 2006 infamous World Cup game the Battle of Nuremberg, because people saw it as kind of a successor to this crazy game from the 50s. I'm eager to get your thoughts on the Battle of Nuremberg, or the Massacre of Nuremberg, because this is kind of one of the things that was most interesting to me a little bit before my time. I don't think I watched the 2006 World Cup, but this was a game that featured 4 red cards and 16 yellow cards.
Yeah, I don't remember watching this at the time. I would have been 13 years old and just getting into soccer around that time. But I went back and watched the highlights of this, and it is pretty striking how different a number of these things are. Because there are 16 yellow cards here. I found one that I'm not sure why he gave it. I thought that one was a little iffy. The other 15 were solid, and I thought there was at least I found at least one or two other instances where there should have been more. So
Do you have a final number? If you're the referee, how many cards are issued in this game?
oh, I don't know. I noticed in the 74th minute, Petit, who got a very easy yellow card early in the second half, was then standing over a player who was just fouled hard. Escalating situation, and some Dutch players come and shove him away. They get yellow cards for their role in the escalation, but he didn't get anything. I mean, for me, that's an easy second caution. But
So you might even agree with Sepp Blatter, who was quoted after the game as saying, intervention by the referee was not consistent.
well, it's hard to say. Well, Sepp Blatter, I'll refer to Sepp Blatter as far as the whole game is concerned, because I just went through and looked at the cards. So as far as consistency goes, I don't know if there were things that he let go that led to these escalations. This particular instant, this was just one guy who wasn't punished, who probably should have been in this wider dispute. But as far as all of the hard fouls go, I mean, I don't know. There may very well have been a hard foul that wasn't penalized, but it looked like all of the fouls that I saw that were penalized were good calls, and they should have been. Well, the 7th minute. This is what I probably should have led with. The 7th minute caution from Boularus is a 100% red card these days, and I think most fans and players recognize that. Spiking the inside of your opponent's thigh is going to get you sent off in 2022, but in 2006 maybe that's just a yellow card, and I don't know if that's what led to fiery emotions for the rest of the match. It certainly couldn't have helped.
Sure. Yeah, this was kind of one of the few cases where the referee, as well as the people that got the cards, got some attention. Usually they don't make the headlines, but in this case, we had Blatter actually come out and say that the referee should have been given a yellow card.
I mean, I'm not sure that's a fair assessment, because maybe it may be a fair assessment. I don't know. What I would say is that it's hard to imagine any referee going into this match in 2006 and not struggling, because this was just. This isn't the kind of game that I think most any referee would have run into similar issues, because these are a lot of big personalities on the fields, a lot of emotions and high stakes. Portugal and Netherlands are two top footballing nations.
Is there a referee code of conduct that sort of prevents him from coming out and defending himself?
Well, I'm sure plenty of referees would love to. There have been referees who definitely give interviews after the fact, and he very well may have. The referee was Russian, so it's possible he only gave interviews to Russian media.
This referee's name was Valentin Ivanov, and he's actually the son of Valentin Ivanov, who was a top goal scorer for the USSR at the 1962 FIFA World Cup.
Wow.
Yeah, and as far as I can tell, he didn't speak up for himself, but his dad actually did, and said his son handled himself quite well, and that FIFA was the ones who were demanding refs be tough on players, and that he was just following instructions.
Oh, the critique was that he wasn't. He was giving too many cards, because I think if anything, there needed to be more severe. At least that was my perspective. I think anyone going back and looking at this with a modern eye will see that there are plenty of things that certainly would have been done differently.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. They were making this hardline stance, and Blatter had said diving was one of his big concerns before the World Cup, or I guess euphemistically simulation was another word they used to describe players who maybe pretend to be more injured than they really are. In the same breath, Blatter admitted, I might have done that when I was a player, but also we should be really hard on it. So I can imagine how it would be hard to have different messages coming when you're the referee, and weighing the influence of all the different things in your ears from the players, coaches, FIFA fans, whatnot.
Oh, it's definitely challenging because you get a lot of different messages from different sources of varying levels of importance, and they often contradict one another, and you just got to go out there and do your best.
And one thing that's I find super interesting is the way that different people perceive the things that they're seeing on the field. And so even though we had very negative reaction from certain corners and the president of FIFA coming out, that wasn't the case from everyone. The Portugal coach, if we have not been clear, I'm so sorry. This was a game between Portugal and the Netherlands, and Portugal does end up winning. And the Portugal coach, he seemed like he was all right with the officiating. I found some quotes from him, and he did address some of the incidences. He talked about Figo, otherwise known as the head butter.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
He said he was much more correct than the Dutch players.
Well, I'm not sure I can agree with that one, because that is one I have in my notes that Figo should have been sent off there, but...
And he went on to say that for years, Portugal have not had a national team to dignify the name, but this team has done that with the way they fought tonight.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure I can get on board with his support for it, because his team was probably the benefactors of any lenience the referee did grant, because, like I said, Figo headbutt, Petit should have gotten a second yellow, and then Van Bronckhorst here at the end. The one yellow card that I saw in here that I'm not sure why he gave was the very, very last one to Van Bronckhorst, his second caution. I'm not sure that had much of an impact on the game because that was 95th minute, but I can understand why the Portuguese coach wouldn't be so upset.
I know. I have one more quote from you. I just got to squeeze in. We have Francisco Marcos. He's the USL founder, and he wrote about this game for the Tampa Tribune, and he suggested that there should be a new line in the Portuguese national anthem to honor the players of this game. He said that they are battlers, and they warrant a line illuminating, the glory they brought to their country.
Well, I wouldn't call Figo's headbutt glorious, but people have their own opinions.
And it's one thing that I've also learned about just this year is that there have been some new studies with the games that took place without fans during, the 2020 and, and 2021 adjusted seasons. Mm-hmm. And that has actually had an impact on cards. Have you heard anything about these studies?
I haven't. I can kind of understand, the psychology behind it. Certainly, I think anyone who puts themselves in the referee's shoes can grasp that would have a psychological impact on the decision maker.
Yeah, there'd been a number of studies in the past that showed positive correlation between crowd size, density, distance from the pitch, all of that impacted the home team's advantage.
I believe it.
Yeah, and there were some studies in Italy where fans were banned from matches for a period of time, and they tried to see how that affected the calls that were made. But there wasn't really an opportunity to do a study on this scale until the global pandemic caused us to change up how soccer leagues were run. And so what I was looking at was a study from the University of Salzburg, and they looked at thousands of games, and they called them ghost games, where there's no fans. And they found that there was a change, that home teams were significantly more likely to get yellow carded, but there was no change for the away teams.
Wow.
So that kind of gives you, if you read into it, the idea that, all right, maybe they were officiating the away teams fairly. They saw the fouls, and they were always giving those, but there was some resistance to giving home teams fouls and angering fans. And then when the fans are gone, maybe you're like...
maybe not resistance so much as, they're not pulling out the card until after they've blown the whistle and the fans have started to react. So I guess my hypothesis would be that hearing that, negative feedback from blowing the whistle, may psychologically make the referee, marginally, slightly more likely to keep the card in their pocket.
I have a question for you as a referee. Is it kind of your nightmare to have to blow the whistle? I mean, that's what you're there to do, but are you just like, please don't let this be the crazy game with all the whistles?
Well, whistles aren't so bad. It's really the cards that make the game a nightmare. Sometimes I have to blow the whistle a lot, and normally the players get on board, but when I have to pull out a lot of cards, it means that players aren't adjusting, and that's when the nightmare really kicks in.
And another thing that we'll see again in this World Cup is VAR, replay footage, and that was introduced in 2018, and I think 2018 went relatively smoothly. There weren't, huge controversies. There were a few. There was the fewest number of cards we've ever seen at a World Cup. What do you expect to see this year? Will VAR affect?
It's hard to say. You got to remember in 2018, VAR was brand new back then. There were only a couple leagues in the world that had implemented it at that time, and that really limited also the number of referees that had experience working as a VAR and therefore could come. So that pool has expanded greatly now that the vast majority, it seems, of professional leagues throughout the world have VAR. With respect to standards, that's a little iffier because FIFA has their own ideas as to where to draw the line for a red card, where to draw the line for what's a clear and obvious red card, which is another thing that the referees have to consider once VAR comes into play. It's not just, is this decision right or wrong? There's subjectivity, and they need to decide it's clear and obvious in order to recommend a review. So
I actually saw another interesting study. This was from University of Leuven in Belgium, and they said that based on their study, slow-mo from VAR was increasing the chance of a red card. If you saw the play in slow motion, people were more likely to judge it as severe. And after studies, I think maybe just that one, but maybe there was others, FIFA specifically said we're not going to use slow-mo to determine severity.
Yeah, no. So they'll use slow-mo to determine where the point of contact is. So they'll slow it down and make it the right frame to figure out where is the fouler contacting the fouled person. Is it spikes into the thigh, or is it just ankle into an ankle or something? Because that's a big that matters a great deal as to the severity of a foul. But as far as determining the severity and the speed at that point really is it matters. So it's not that slow-mo is completely useless, but it's not ideal for some aspects, for judging some aspects of those plays.
One other just funny thing that I found in my research was a lot of times penalties are spurred by emotions on the field. You feel like somebody played dirty, but it's also often what people are saying that's kind of sending somebody over the edge. And often you don't know, you can't hear what they're saying on the field. But there were a few cases where the players were asked in interviews and actually admitted to what the words were that set them off. And I found a few. There was, when it came to Zidane, who we had mentioned briefly, had a notable red card headbutting incident in 2006. He said that his opponent had called his sister a whore. That was what set him off. And I found another one, which was Eric Cantona. This was not a World Cup game, but a very notable red card because he got into it with a fan while he was being escorted off and kicked them. And he said what set him off was his mother being called a French whore.
Wow.
Yeah, so I don't know if there's a takeaway from this. Maybe that's language you should remove from your vocabulary or to avoid cards, or maybe just get used to it.
That's more of a cultural question, I think, than a sports question, honestly. My perspective is that players should respect one another, and that kind of derogatory language has no place in the game, but I'm sure there are plenty of people who would disagree with me and would call me all sorts of names for having a different opinion.
As we're looking forward to the upcoming World Cup, are you excited to see some yellow and red cards? Would you be okay if there's no red cards in the upcoming World Cup?
I'm always interested in close decisions and interesting situations, but I certainly don't want to see anyone sent off for violent conduct or things like that. If someone gets sent off for denying an obvious goal scoring opportunity, I think that's part of the game, but generally I just want to see fair play and exciting competition.
A very diplomatic answer. I don't want to say I'm rooting for yellow and red cards. I'll kind of stick to what I say about all sports events, which is I want to see something I've never seen before. That's always exciting to me. So hopefully we get some of that. Thank you all for listening and joining us for this episode of For Your Reference. If you'd like to get in touch with us, tell us any interesting stories that you've found, feel free to email us at podcast@sportsreference.com. Thanks.